There's no by becoming rich. Take all your money, buy Bitcoin.
Wake up every morning and say GM.
GM. GM. Okay. Wednesday, 4th of September. Are we going to zero? Or is this the bottom? So, yesterday, we had a move down, excuse me, throughout the day. Characterizing in this move so far is just a series of counter trend rallies. So first of all, that's obviously bearish, as you can see here. If I could just take that off. Counter trend rallies that come up to roughly around the 50 EMA on the 1 hour. We get some traps above, then we make new lows, we trap above, then we make new lows, and each time it makes new lows it bounces because of course it clears out positioning. People get in and they get too short, and that allows for the next bounce. We've taken out these lows from middle of August. We've moved down almost into a gap fill at that 55.4. So I talked about that level a couple weeks ago and mentioned that was an area of an untested breakout, and then the next one down there was at 51.5, and then we have 53, which is sort of a solid support level, at least it was at one point from over here. So expectation is that we probably are going to go lower than this, but we most likely go higher first. That would be how I'm looking at it. So there's going to be a retest of these lows. That's usually the best assumption. There's almost always a retest of the lows. So we're going to go up, in one of these two paths. If we're bullish, I think it holds and compresses here and then breaks higher. And if not, then I think we just come up, retest, pull all the way back slowly, and get some kind of retest of the lows before a move up. Those are obviously the bullish paths, if it's going to be bullish. If it's going to be bearish, it's actually a little bit easier, the bearish path. In a bearish move, we'd actually have a sharp squeeze followed by a nuke to new lows. So actually, if you're bullish, or if you'd like to see some potential long setting up, you don't really want to see a strong squeeze up. I think if we squeeze up into the daily open and up to this 57.7 area, I think if we move up there and you see it stalling and starts to fall back, that's the most bearish outcome. And that almost certainly leads to new lows. You don't want to see these quick retracements generally. Anything can happen, but this is a downtrending market. If it moves back towards the daily open, sellers will step in. If we move anywhere near the pivot, sellers will step in. I think we've gone down too far for the pivot to be hit. I just think that it's quite simple. This is a bearish market, but it won't stay bearish on lower time frames, forever. I think that when you zoom out and look at where we're at here, if this level holds, which will probably take a few days to confirm, we can absolutely see a move higher. I do think that rallying towards the rate cuts would make sense, mostly because I actually expect the rate cut itself to be a sell the news event. And so for it to be a sell the news event, you'd probably expect to see it rise into it, right? So it's typically how it would go. If you're thinking about any event that the market ends up selling, you normally want to see a rising market moving into it and then a sell-off after. So Bitcoin ETF, right? Market rallied leading into it, then sold off. ETH ETF, market rallied into it, then sold off. Many examples of this. Trump event, right? Trump speaking, market rallied into it, sell the news. and so on and so on. So if we don't go up, if we're not rising going into the 18th of September, my expectation then is probably the opposite. That will be an admission, or at least a market view, that rate cuts are not bullish, that they're somehow bearish, which would then allow longs to be the more attractive opportunity. Even though, a lot of this, so too much of the talk and too much of the, too much of the discussion that you see online is about, are the rate cuts going to be bullish or going to be bearish? This is stupid, because you're never going to know. When you look back 6 months from now, then we'll know, right? But people are like trying to pin their entire bull market hopes on the rate cuts, which is why obviously I think they're going to be bearish initially, because so many people are betting and hoping that rate cuts are going to save them. It's quite simple. It's just a simple calculation. But same as like when you have CPI or the jobs market data, non-farm payroll, or GDP, or when the Fed speaker, whenever Powell's speaking and they're doing a rate cut or rate hike, there's way too much emphasis on what does this mean for like the next fucking 10 years, and not enough acceptance that it's just one part and one small movement within a broader trend. It doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't mean anything. Like, for example, you have, where was it? It was here. This was non-farm payroll. So if you're just looking at like economic data, which rate cuts are just an extension of, it's all stuff, actions that are taken by the Fed, or, so obviously policy changes, or it's economic data that feeds into the Fed's decisions. This, the 3rd of May, was non-farm payroll, and it was a really bullish reaction because the jobs market got weaker, right? Unemployment rate was rising, so Bitcoin pumped. Wow, that's so impactful. We all need to get super long. And then, of course, it went lower about a month later. This was CPI, inflation. Wow, really bullish inflation. And then, of course, we went lower. This was non-farm payroll. Remember the thing that made us pump in the 3rd of May? Well, on the 7th of June, it made us dump. Failed the highs, breakout, and then ended up going all the way down. Then, I mean, you can keep doing this on and on and on. We have non-farm payroll here, which has marked the bottom with this reversal candle. You then had CPI coming in, the inflation numbers, which I believe was over here, setting up for this move higher. Then Trump speaking. Then another non-farm payroll, which was here, the Friday I sold my coins. We had a bad non-farm payroll. That was when the recession fears happened. That was when we had the economic data that indicated a recession. And the SAM rule was triggered, etc., etc., etc. And we went to fucking zero, but we didn't quite go to zero. And so on and so on and so on and so on. Right? So, none of this shit matters. So stop putting too much emphasis on it. How many people do you hear talking about the 3rd of May, the May non-farm payroll? Now, not that many. It was huge at the time, in the short term. Why is no one talking about Trump's crypto speech anymore? That was fucking massive. Trump assassination attempt was here. Wow, boom. The market is just scrambling for a narrative. It's desperate for a narrative. So, keep it simple. We've taken out some lows, so it's obvious that we're bouncing, right? It's been 15th of August to the 4th of September, exactly 3 weeks. When you have a 3 week, a level of 3 weeks where there is liquidity, and price went higher and made a new high, and then we come all the way back and we touch that off, we're going to bounce. So the bounce, the automatic reaction, is completely normal, to be expected, and that's probably a level we come back and retest. That'd be my guess. I think we come back down to that area, and on the retest, in this area here, that's where you want to be looking at. Do we rip straight through it, or do we reverse? I lean towards reversal, because even if it's bearish, Usually you can see some kind of retest and hold and rallies up and goes for some liquidity and touches that off, and then down we go. Right? There's definitely room for a stronger rally up into some of these gaps. If it's going to be really bearish, you will not see Bitcoin reclaim the 50 on the 1 hour. That's the one to watch. If it's truly bearish, you won't see that get reclaimed. You'll see it move up. It will fail somewhere around that, and it will sell off sharply if this is a liquidation cascade. Otherwise, I think if that low holds, and if we hold going into the weekend, there is potential for it to start building back up towards the rate cuts, which are next Wednesday. No? 2 weeks on Wednesday. So we've got another week to come with CPI. Yeah, I think it's too soon overall. I do think we should go lower before the rate cuts, but I do think we can rally into them. So if I'm looking over here at the 18th, over there, right, I think it's entirely possible if we go, let me get a new chart. Because now we're getting close enough. Get a new chart, and I go to the exact same fucking chart. This is definitely not clean chart. So many charts, so little time. So, you get the 18th rate cuts over here. Now that we're in the downtrend, I think we can see a bounce, new lows, down to probably retest that level, and then rally into the rate cut itself. And at that point, if we've rallied into it, I expect that to be bearish, at least temporarily. And we continue this sort of, maybe it's going to look like this, where it's like a higher time frame distributive structure, like that. Maybe that's what we see. Who knows? It all depends whether we rally into the rate cuts or not, like I've said. As we see here, I see this on a smaller scale, the exact same thing, or a very similar thing. You take out kilos, you rally up, you come back. Right? It's like we've dumped down, we bounce up. In fact, we'd probably do something like that, right? And then down into a bottom, which actually would have enough buyers, enough demand. I don't think there's going to be enough demand here to push price to here. That doesn't make sense, right? Last time we were here, it was able to build up into those highs, and then it failed and fell off. I think it probably needs to go lower to generate enough liquidity to be able to move towards those levels or towards a retest. So that's what I'm looking at today. And what else? Well, the breakdown happened after the New York session closed, so be mindful there is a gap as we move back up. You know, it closed over here. So over here is where the New York session closed. So was that strong selling overnight? Was that a sign of things to come, or was that just post-session flush out the stops and we go higher? We'll see. Heading into today's session, calendar for Wednesday, we have job openings, a little bit impactful, but nothing much apart from that. So that's it. GM. In fact, no. 2 things I have to do. Number 1, I'm going to do this. I asked you guys a question yesterday about mini lesson. How do you explain this? About open interest rising as price falls. I'm going to go through that on trade of the day. And what was the other thing? Yeah. I want to look at ETH and how did ETH, and there we go. There's your head and shoulders pattern from yesterday. Because I mentioned ETH as a good trade. I mean, that worked out fucking really nicely. I wish I traded it. It obviously got the weaker right shoulder, which in and of itself is a really good sign for the short. It makes it more difficult, of course, because you don't get the proper retest. But the fact that it can't retest is a very sign of weakness. We broke through that level, impulse lower, took out the stops, took out the lows. So anyway, whether you trade it or not is irrelevant. I just wanted to look at ETH because I didn't trade it. I was trading Bitcoin, just a force of habit. ETH in an area where, I mean, you could see it hold there for now. In these type of setups, it's like, it's clearly bearish, but it keeps dumping into areas where it can bounce from. Like even look Solana. It's back down into a previous area of strong demand. It's taking out the lows, reversing. It's putting in a hammer candle so far. And so this is the awkward thing, that Solana could rally up to here, right? Solana can easily rally up like that even, without being, without even interrupting the bearish move. You can see a strong squeeze, or what looks like a strong squeeze. So it's just these tricky markets when they're looking like breaking down. You can see them here. Like Solana look like shit there, and it bounces, and it looks like it's going lower, and it bounces, and it looks like it's going lower, and you have a big squeeze. So even in bearish markets, you see many, many attempts. To be fair, we've seen a bunch of that already, but regardless. Bitcoin, ETH, Sol, all bearish at the moment. I expect rallies. I'm waiting for a retest of the lows on Bitcoin. And if it's going to break down further, you're going to see probably a sharp bounce followed by a sharp retracement. But I'll let you know how all that's progressing throughout the day. GM.